Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War, and it is my privilege today to introduce to you the new president of the American Battlefield Trust, David Duncan. David, thank you so much for taking some time to join us today.
Chris, glad to. Thank you very much for your time.
Congratulations. Big move, high profile move. Wow, you've got to be feeling pretty good right now.
I'm actually still processing it to a certain extent, but very, very excited. Very grateful for the opportunity, really to follow in the footsteps of my friend, my mentor, Jim Lighthizer, in the great work that we've done together over the last 20 years here at the American Battlefield Trust.
I've got to say, you look remarkably calm for a guy who's just been given this incredible responsibility.
Well, I don't actually take on the full responsibility on October 1st. So like I say, now, right now I'm just drinking from a fire hose. So it's all good. It's fun.
You mentioned, walking in the footsteps of Jim Lighthizer, certainly one of the best known and most beloved figures in the Civil War community. But you've actually been walking right beside him for a long time now. So it's not necessarily a big daunting challenge like some people might think.
Well, I would hope not. And yeah, the full story goes back more than 20 years in that I was working in fundraising, but on the commercial fundraising side. I worked for an agency, but Civil War battlefields and Civil War preservation have always been my passion. This goes back to the 1990s. And basically, when the merger between the old Association for the Preservation of Civil War Sites and the old Civil War Trust happened in November of 1999, and I knew that was coming because I stayed connected to other folks in both organizations. I basically begged Jim for the job, and I was his first professional hire and started on March 20th, 2000. And we were $7 million in debt. We didn't know exactly how many members we had. Some thought it was as many as 40,000, but it turned out to be really about 22,000. We had very minimal staff. And so it was really a startup situation. We had to tear the whole thing down and begin building it literally from the ground up. I've told people the story before that it was basically when Jim hired me, it was as if he walked me into an airplane hangar and all the parts of the airplane are lying there on the floor. And he claps me on the back and he says, "All right, big fella, let's get this thing up in the air." Because that's the way it was. But we learned the job by doing the job. And what I told the search committee of the board when we started this process back in February was that I counted up the days, and in that time, Jim Lighthizer and I probably worked together for a little over 7,000 days. And we have probably had a conversation about some aspect of the business on almost every single one of those days, weekends and vacations included. It's a different role to be certain, but I've worked very, very closely with Jim. And again, I told the search committee, if you can find someone who's worked more closely with Jim in this business, please hire them.
That's a lot of contact. So certainly over the years then, the two of you have developed a very consistent view of the importance of battlefield preservation and operations for the organization. What's it going to be like for you to kind of step out on your own from that conversation?
Well, first of all, I'm hoping that, on October 1st, nobody will feel any sort of grand tectonic shift. Because the last thing I would want to do is mess up anything that Jim and I have worked so hard to build. So, yes, at least initially, there's going to be more of the same. We're going to continue to save the land. We're going to continue to promote our education programs, utilize the technology platforms that we've really mastered over the last year, and especially the last 6 months. But I think a key element to all of those things is taking them to the next level. And that's going to be essentially my vision for this. On the battlefield preservation side of things, we have it within our grasp in the next few years to substantially complete the preservation of many of America's most important battlefields. So that's going to be a focus of ours. I think the number at Gettysburg is somewhere in the neighborhood of another 440 acres or so, and that battlefield is substantially complete. Certainly at places like Antietam, it's getting to be that as well. Shiloh, Perryville is almost finished. We've got opportunities at Rev War battlefields. I know this is emerging Civil War, so forgive me for that. But
That's all right.
places like Utah Springs and South Carolina and other things that we're working on with the Liberty Trail. So to me, that's going to be a level of excitement and intensity going forward here in the next few years, is how many of these iconic, important, priceless battlefields that we all know and love can we essentially check off the list and say that they're substantially done. Then on the education side, I think we have the opportunity to really supercharge what we've been doing. And I certainly don't want to make light of any sort of COVID-19 situation, because a lot of people are suffering, no question about that. But what it has afforded us the opportunity to do is to really learn how to be very, very good at remote and virtual education offerings. Gary Edelman and Larry Swader on our web team, they're just putting out incredible content. We're getting unbelievable numbers when it comes to visits to our YouTube channel and views, and teachers accessing our content and quality. So really kind of look to supercharge those efforts even more, with the goal, of course, to just get more and more people excited about our history. That's ultimately the thing here. We've all seen the surveys that said, the one word most usually associated with history is boring. Well, I once attended a lecture of David McCullough, and it was mostly teachers were in the room, but he said, shame on us if we make history boring, because those of us who love history know that it's anything but. And then I think all of these, for the third thing that I'm really focusing on is how it all comes together as we're heading toward the 250th anniversary of the country in 2026. Now that's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, of course, but I'm hoping that we can continue to push the conversation to the point where it's not just about the signing of that document, but that this becomes a celebration of all 250 years of Americans' history, and a commemoration of that history as well, too, and really utilizing the battlefields as place-based education drivers, get more people to those battlefields so they can experience that history.
I think that's one of the things that the Trust has done so successfully. When you move from being simply the Civil War Trust to also having the Rev War component through Campaign 1776, adding the War of 1812 things. And so it's really created a very holistic approach to how we're looking at American history. So it sounds like, you guys have already set that up in a way that really is going to allow you to exploit that really well.
Absolutely. And the really satisfying thing is how supportive our members have been. And we worked very hard when we were making that decision over a long period of time to make sure our members were going to be supportive. And it's just blown us away how much they've embraced it. I would still say the majority of the land preservation work that we're doing is still based in the Civil War. No question about it. The battlefields are bigger, there are more of them. There's still just more physical tracts of land to save. But where we're really making progress is in a place like South Carolina with this project called the Liberty Trail that we're working on. That you said the perfect word. It's a holistic approach. It's land preservation, it's technology married with education and interpretation to get people out on the ground to go visit these places, or just to access them online or on their devices, so they can learn a part of America's history that most people don't know. And my contention is that, and a lot of us here, is that the revolution was actually decided in the Southern campaigns. The Northern campaign's kind of a stalemate, but we were able to bleed Cornwallis dry in the South, and then we stumbled into Yorktown, and Rochambeau and Washington bottled him up there. So that story I think is very, very important, and it's exciting. It's very exciting.
And certainly this summer, we've seen lots of instances where history has come into the news. And it seems to me a great reminder that history is still vitally relevant to us today. That also has to be a real opportunity for you as well, I think.
It is. And I'm operating from a basic premise that this country is the greatest country that has ever existed on the planet in human history. It is not perfect because it was created by human beings, and human beings by nature are imperfect. But if you believe, as I do, that this country has been the greatest force for good for the greatest number of people in history, then to me, you would want to know why that happened or how that happened. And for me, that's the study of history. And so that's why I try to have a goal of reading about 10,000 pages a year. That's 25 400-page books, roughly. Probably about 3/4 of that is some form of history, either American history or military history or things like that. So I'm crazy about this stuff. But for me, the concern comes from some of the studies that have come out recently that we've all seen about the cultural tide coming in against history, either about how it's not being taught in schools, specifically colleges, even anymore. You can graduate at most of America's colleges as a history major without taking a course in American history. So that's just a data point that we always have to keep in mind. One of the ones that jumped out at me was earlier this year, there was a Pew Research study that said something on the lines of only 15% of people under 30 agreed with the statement that I just made, that America is the greatest country on the planet. And to me, that's an item of concern. When only 15% of the generation coming up behind us has that same view of America, that's concerning to me. And I think that the more people learn about their history, the better appreciation they have for their country and where we are today. So that's the motivating driver for me, for just constantly pushing for more and more history.
And that's a philosophy that dates back to your dad, as I recall, correct?
Yes, yeah, to a certain extent. My dad I say this line to people that I meet all the time. My dad taught middle school history, civics, and social studies for 38 years. I don't know how he didn't come home and beat us every night, but he didn't. He was a good and patient man. But I grew up in the house with Bruce Catton and Shelby Foote side by side on the shelf. We lived in southwestern Virginia, a little town called Salem, right next to Roanoke, Virginia. And he was a middle school teacher, so we didn't have a big budget for family vacations. So I didn't get to battlefields until I was later in life, but I sure read about them. And the important part of that experience, I think, was you can read about a battlefield and a battle all you want, but until you actually go there and experience it, those are two very different things. And I've never had anybody say to me, I went to the battlefield and that was okay, but it really came to life to me when I read a book about it. It's always the other way around. I read about the battle, I went there and I saw it, and oh my gosh, now it makes perfect sense to me.
And to me, that's such the key importance to preserving battlefields, is that they are primary sources for us. They give us this experiential learning opportunity, and they're irreplaceable.
Absolutely. We refer to them all the time around here as outdoor classrooms. And once you pave over a battlefield or destroy it, there are some instances where we've clawed back battlefields that have been developed, but it's very, very hard and it's very, very difficult. One of those great success stories is a place like Franklin, Tennessee. Literally half-acre lot by half-acre lot, we are bringing that battlefield back to life with some great local groups involved there as well too. And a couple of other places around the country where we've been able to knock down houses. We at Brandy Station a few years ago, several years ago, someone had built one of these what we call McMansions right at the top of Fleetwood Hill, basically on Jeb Stuart's headquarters during the Battle of Brandy Station. And finally, the landowner decided that he would be willing to sell for us. So we had to scramble to get the money together, or he was going to sell it to a developer who was going to put another 5, 6, or 7 of those McMansions all over that hill. So there's nothing like standing in the place with a good guide telling you what happened on that ground so that you can experience it.
So do you have a favorite battlefield spot that you like to go out and walk and reconnect?
My favorite battlefield is one you're going to be familiar with because of your writings, and it's not one that most people usually bring up, and it's Chancellorsville. That is my all-time favorite battlefield. Just the drama of the entire story, with, between Hooker and Lee, and of course Stonewall Jackson, and how the trajectory of the war changed after Chancellorsville, in my opinion. Unfortunately, with COVID, I don't get to get out there that often. I live closer to Manassas, and that's a great one to get out, walk the dog and do some day hikes and reconnect with some history there as well too. And Manassas to me is amazing because it is completely surrounded by the crush of Northern Virginia development. And then within just a few seconds, you can be back in 1861 or 1862. It's that well preserved. So those are my favorites.
There's some great opportunities to get out on the field in both of those places. Yeah. So now looking ahead for you. The trust has many members. One of the things I admire about the organization so much is that people are so devoted to the organization. So looking ahead as you hit the ground, what can the members of the organization do to help you as you start to move the organization forward?
Oh my gosh. We have the best members in the nonprofit world as far as I'm concerned. And I've spent the last 20 years as an expert in that work. We have benchmarked our data against other organizations like the Colonial Williamsburg, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Smithsonian, other organizations like that. And when we have done that, we have discovered time and time again that our donors are more loyal. They stay with us longer than donors to those other organizations. And I think that's because we do what we say we're going to do with their donations. We are good stewards of their gifts to us. And that's the way we operate every single day. We're a 4-star charity with Charity Navigator. That's the highest rating you can get. We've had that for 9 years, and they say that only 2% of those charities receive that rating for that long. So the only thing I would ask our members to do is just stay with us. It's our responsibility to give you compelling, intriguing, and exciting opportunities for preservation, because we know that's what your passion is. And ultimately, it's not about me, it's not about Jim, it's not about the organization. We're just the conduit. The donors are the ones that have the passion for saving this land, and we're just presenting the opportunities so that they can fulfill that passion. And I honestly and truly mean that. I mean, that's not just president speak. That's the way we have operated for the last 20 years. That's the way we're going to continue to operate. And so just know that my dedication to this organization for 20 years is going to keep going forward. and so, nothing in that respect is going to change. So if you guys will stay with us, we'll be okay. I'm going to jump in real quick, just a point of privilege here, Chris, because I came across a note. I found it in some earlier writings that I had done a long time ago. And I'll back up just real quick. On my very first day as a new member of, back then it was called the Civil War Preservation Trust. At the very first staff meeting, Jim Lighthizer asked me if I had any words of wisdom to share with the rest of the staff members that I was joining. And I told him that coming from the ruthless, awful, for-profit fundraising side of the world over to a nonprofit organization that was feeding my passion for history and historic preservation, what I said was, I have either died and gone to heaven, or I am the luckiest man alive on planet Earth. And I still believe that to this day. In 20 years, I have not had more than 20 days where it's felt like work. And I know how lucky I am to be able to say that. But I came across this writing. It's Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it describes my situation. So, pardon me for being a little vain here. But Emerson said, the crowning fortune of a man is to be born to some purpose which finds him employment and happiness, whether it be to make baskets or broadswords or canals or statues or songs. And to that I would add, or say, battlefields, because I'm extremely lucky that I have found the purpose which finds me employment and happiness.
Hard to go wrong with Emerson, for sure. So is there anything I haven't asked you today, David, that I should have, or that some final point you'd want to pass along?
Just that, boy, we're the team that Jim had built up around him is still the team that we very much have in place here. So, great colleagues, tremendous professionals. The board is the most committed and generous nonprofit board, again, in America. I can't tell you who I was having this discussion with, but probably about 6 months ago, right after, back in February, before the COVID stuff hit, I was talking to a president of a well-known national nonprofit veteran service organization. I won't tell you which one, but and this is why, because he said, hey, I looked up your board members online, and I would trade my board for yours today, because it just, they're just good, solid, committed, generous people. So I would just tell folks that the team is in place. The mission is still the mission. We're not going off into any sort of radical changes here. Preservation, education, inspiration, those three words right at the bottom of our logo. Those are our watchwords going forward. And we're just looking forward to bigger and better successes. Once we get through all the COVID stuff and we can all get back to some semblance of normal, we should be able to knock this thing out of the park.
Well, I know that the organization is in fantastic hands. I'll end with just a personal anecdote. The first time I met David, I was doing some research on the history of preservation at Chancellorsville. And so I went up to go through the trust archives, and David met me the first time, and he gave me PDFs of all the hallowed grounds and copies of all his fundraising letters, and just the generosity of spirit that you showed that day for a guy who had, walked in, you hadn't known him before. It just made such a powerful personal impression on me. And that generosity of spirit, I think, is just something that I've always associated with you. So I am really excited that the trust is in such great hands as you move forward as the president.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So, David Duncan, the new president of the American Battlefield Trust, thanks so much for joining us today, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Best wishes.
Bye-bye.